Imagine checking into a hotel where the architecture itself is designed to kill you, where the walls have eyes, the floors have trap doors, and your charming host is counting the profit he'll make from your bones. This is the true story of America's first serial killer and the sisters who nearly became his final masterpiece. Before we dive into the story, what's the darkest case you've ever heard or experienced? Write it in the comments. Let's compare notes. Also, tell us where you're watching from today and what time is it right now. We're building a community of truth seekers who aren't afraid of the dark. Now, let's continue with the story. The smoke arrived first, rolling through the Chicago streets like a living thing, thick with the stench of coal and ambition. Clara Calloway pressed her gloved hand against the train window, watching the city materialize through the gray haze. Beside her, Martha sat rigid, her face a mirror of concern that Clara had learned to ignore over their 23 years together. "It's magnificent," Clara whispered, though the word felt inadequate for the towering structures that pierced the autumn sky. This was 1893, the year the world came to Chicago, and the Calloway sisters had finally escaped the suffocating parlors of Philadelphia society. Martha's fingers found Clara's wrist, a familiar gesture of protection. "We should have waited for Father's associate to meet us, a proper escort. We're not children." Clara straightened despite the familiar ache in her spine, the curve that had defined her existence since birth, the deformity that made her an object of pity at every social gathering, every potential courtship. Here, in this city of strangers, she could be someone new. The station platform teemed with humanity. Vendors hawked newspapers screaming headlines about the World's Fair. Immigrants clutched worn suitcases, their eyes wide with the same hope that burned in Clara's chest. Martha gripped their shared trunk, while Clara navigated the crowd, refusing to let her twisted spine dictate her pace. "Pardon me, miss." The voice was cultured, warm. "You seem to have dropped this." Clara turned to find a man holding her mother's cameo brooch, the clasp apparently having given way in the chaos. He was perhaps 40, distinguished in a well-tailored suit, with intelligent eyes that met hers directly without that familiar flicker of pity when people noticed her posture. How careless of me. She accepted the brooch, startled by the genuine smile he offered. "Dr. Silas Vane," he introduced himself with a slight bow. "I run a pharmacy just 3 blocks from here, and I confess I noticed you ladies seem somewhat adrift in our fair city. Might I assist you in finding accommodations? The hotels near the fairgrounds are scandalously overpriced, but I maintain a boarding house of exceptional quality. Modern conveniences, respectable clientele, and remarkably affordable rates." Martha stepped forward, positioning herself between Clara and this stranger. "We have arrangements already, thank you." But Dr. Vane's attention remained on Clara, and for the first time in her life, she felt seen rather than observed. "Of course. Though if your arrangements prove unsatisfactory, my establishment is called the World's Fair Hotel. It's quite an architectural marvel, if I may say so. Built to my own specifications, incorporating the latest advances in comfort and safety." He produced an elegant card, pressing it into Clara's palm. His fingers were cool, steady, a physician's hands. "I do hope to see you again, miss." He waited. "Calloway, Clara Calloway, Miss Calloway." He smiled again, then disappeared into the crowd like smoke dissipating. Martha's voice was sharp. "Clara, we know nothing about that man." But Clara was already tucking the card into her reticule, feeling its weight like a promise. In Dr. Vane's eyes, she hadn't seen pity. She'd seen possibility, and after a lifetime of being her deformity first and herself second, that single moment of recognition felt like water to someone dying of thirst. She didn't know yet that some thirsts are better left unquenched. Their arranged lodgings proved exactly as disappointing as Clara had secretly hoped. The boarding house on Wells Street smelled of boiled cabbage and desperation, with paper-thin walls that transmitted every cough and argument from neighboring rooms. Martha tried to make the best of it, unpacking their trunk with determined efficiency. But Clara stood at the grimy window, watching smoke curl between buildings like beckoning fingers. 3 days passed before she suggested visiting Dr. Vane's pharmacy. Martha protested, of course, but Clara manufactured a convincing headache, and they both knew the medical supplies they'd brought from Philadelphia were running low. The pharmacy stood on 63rd Street, its windows gleaming with bottles of colored liquid that caught the weak autumn sunlight like jewels. Dr. Vane looked up from his mortar and pestle as they entered, and his face transformed with genuine pleasure. "Miss Calloway, what an unexpected delight." "My sister requires headache powder," Martha announced, her tone making it clear this was purely transactional. But Vane was already moving around the counter, his attention focused entirely on Clara. "I have something far superior to the common preparations, a formula of my own design, incorporating willow bark extract and a trace of laudanum. Perfectly safe, I assure you." He paused, studying Clara's face with clinical interest that somehow felt intimate rather than invasive. "Though if I may be so bold, Miss Calloway, your discomfort likely stems from muscular strain related to your spinal condition. The curvature forces certain muscle groups to compensate, creating tension that radiates upward." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Most people pretended not to notice her deformity, their politeness a form of erasure. Vane simply acknowledged it as fact, without judgment or pity. "You're quite perceptive, Doctor. I make it my business to observe." He began mixing compounds with practiced precision. "I've studied anatomy extensively. The human body is a magnificent machine, Miss Calloway. Each variation, each difference, tells a unique story. Yours speaks of resilience. Lesser constitutions would have succumbed to such a spinal configuration in childhood. No one had ever called her resilient before. Fragile, delicate, unfortunate, but never resilient." "Your boarding house," Martha interrupted, her voice tight. "You mentioned it was near the fairgrounds." "Indeed. Perhaps you'd care to see it? I'm quite proud of the design." Vane sealed the powder into a small envelope, waving away Clara's attempt to pay. "Consider it a professional courtesy, and if you're not satisfied with your current accommodations, I have several rooms available. The rates are remarkably reasonable, especially for ladies of refinement traveling without male protection." The invitation hung in the air like bait on a hook, and Clara knew Martha could sense the trap. But Clara was tired of being protected, tired of being treated like something fragile that might shatter at the slightest touch. "We'd be delighted to see it," Clara said, ignoring Martha's sharp intake of breath. The World's Fair Hotel rose 3 stories, an imposing structure of brick and limestone that occupied an entire corner lot. Vane led them through a marble-floored lobby decorated with potted palms and modern gas fixtures that cast steady, bright light. 60 guest rooms, Vane announced with obvious pride. Hot and cold, running water in every suite. Speaking tubes for communication between floors. And the latest advancement in climate control, with gas heating that can be regulated from a central system. He guided them up a grand staircase, past hallways that seemed to stretch in impossible directions. Clara noticed odd architectural choices, a door that opened onto brick wall, a hallway that terminated abruptly, windows that looked into other interior rooms rather than outside. When she mentioned it, Vane laughed. The building's been through several renovations. I'm constantly improving the design based on new innovations. Some remnants of old configurations remain. Think of it as a structure in perpetual evolution, much like the city itself. The tour ended in what Vane called the bridal suite, a spacious room decorated in deep burgundy and gold. Heavy curtains framed windows that overlooked the street, and the furniture was clearly expensive. What struck Clara most was the silence. Despite being on a busy street corner, no sound penetrated the walls. "Soundproofing," Vane explained, noting her reaction. "I installed special insulation. My guests' privacy and rest are paramount." Over the following weeks, Clara found excuses to visit the pharmacy. Sometimes for legitimate supplies, often for conversation. Vane treated her like an intellectual equal, discussing medical journals, the fair's exhibits, advances in surgical techniques. He never mentioned her spine unless it was relevant to health, never treated her as less than whole. Martha watched this courtship with increasing alarm, but her warnings fell on deaf ears. When Vane proposed marriage after only 6 weeks, Clara accepted before he'd finished asking. They were wed quietly at City Hall on a gray November morning, with Martha as the sole witness, her face a mask of barely controlled dread. "The bridal suite is yours now," Vane told Clara afterward, his kiss on her cheek cool and proprietary. "Both of you, of course. Martha, I insist you move in as well. Family should stay together, and the suite has ample room. Besides, I prefer to keep my most precious possessions close." Something in the way he said possessions made Martha's blood run cold, but Clara was already nodding, her eyes bright with a happiness Martha had never seen before. And perhaps that was the most terrifying thing of all, watching her sister walk willingly into a cage, believing it was a palace. The trap had been set with perfect precision. Now it was simply a matter of waiting for the mechanism to spring. Moving into the bridal suite should have felt like a beginning. Instead, Martha couldn't shake the sensation of an ending, as though they'd crossed some invisible threshold from which there was no return. The suite itself was undeniably luxurious. Thick carpets muffled footsteps, the furniture was carved mahogany, and the bathroom featured porcelain fixtures so modern they might have been imported from Europe. But luxury couldn't explain the peculiar details that accumulated in Martha's mind, like evidence at a crime scene. The door locked only from the outside. Vane explained this as a safety feature, preventing guests from accidentally trapping themselves, but Martha noticed he kept the only key on a chain at his waist. The windows, while large and draped in velvet, were sealed shut. Vane claimed this preserved the heating efficiency, but Martha felt the walls closing in like a fist. Clara noticed none of this. She floated through those first days in a haze of contentment, arranging their belongings, reading the medical journals Vane brought her, smiling at nothing. At night, Vane would visit briefly, kissing Clara's forehead with the detached affection one might show a prized possession before retiring to his own quarters elsewhere in the building. "He's so respectful," Clara murmured one evening, brushing her hair before the vanity. "So different from the men back home, who only saw my dowry and their duty." Martha bit back her response. Respectful wasn't the word she'd use for a man who watched his new wife like a scientist observing an experiment. The scratching started on their 4th night. Martha woke to the sound, soft but persistent, coming from somewhere inside the walls. She lay rigid in her bed, listening to the rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape that seemed to move along the perimeter of the room. In the other bed, Clara slept peacefully, her breathing steady and deep. By morning, Martha had convinced herself it was rodents, exactly as Vane suggested when she mentioned it over breakfast in the hotel's dining room. He was constantly present now, appearing at mealtimes, in hallways, somehow always nearby without seeming to follow them. "Old buildings settle," he said, spreading butter on toast with surgical precision. "Pipes expand and contract. Rats nest in the walls. All perfectly normal, I assure you." But the scratching returned each night, and sometimes Martha thought she heard something else beneath it. Something that might have been words, if words could be whispered by the dying. During the days, Martha began exploring the hotel. She told herself she was simply curious about their new home, but truthfully, she was looking for exits. What she found instead was architectural madness. On the second floor, a hallway led past 6 doors before terminating in a brick wall. No windows, no turns, just a dead end that made no structural sense. She'd walked this same hallway yesterday, and she could have sworn it continued to a stairwell. When she tried to retrace her steps, she found herself in an unfamiliar corridor lined with doors that opened into storage closets, barely large enough for a person to stand upright. A staircase near the rear of the building climbed 19 steps before meeting a ceiling with no door, no access, no purpose. Another descended into darkness that her candle couldn't penetrate, the air growing cold and thick with a smell she couldn't identify. Something chemical and sweet that made her stomach turn. She mentioned none of this to Clara, whose happiness felt fragile as spun glass. But Martha began making a mental map, trying to understand the building's logic. There wasn't any. It was as if the hotel had been designed by someone who understood architecture, but deliberately chose to subvert it, creating a space that confused and disoriented. Guest rooms stood empty, despite Vane's claims of high occupancy. Martha encountered the same elderly couple twice, always in the lobby, but never saw them enter or exit their room. A young woman with frightened eyes appeared in the dining room one morning, then vanished. When Martha asked about her, Vane explained she'd checked out early, though Martha had heard no one on the stairs, no carriage arriving to collect her. The hotel felt alive, not in the sense of vitality, but in the way a predator lives, patient and hungry. One afternoon, while Clara napped under the influence of one of Vane's tonics, Martha investigated their room more thoroughly. She ran her fingers along the decorative molding near the ceiling, searching for the source of those nightly sounds. Her finger caught on something, a depression in the wood that gave slightly under pressure. She pressed harder. A small section of molding swung inward on a hidden hinge, revealing a hole perhaps 3 inches in diameter. She brought her candle closer, peering into the darkness beyond. An eye stared back at her. Martha stumbled backward, biting down on the scream that tried to escape. When she looked again, the eye was gone. Just darkness. Just a ventilation shaft, surely. Just her imagination running wild in this place that seemed designed to unhinge the mind. But when she examined the molding further, she found 3 more of these hidden panels, positioned to provide a complete view of the room from multiple angles. Someone had drilled observation ports into their walls, disguised them as architectural details, and had been watching them sleep, dress, live their private lives. The scratching that night was louder, more insistent. Clara slept through it, her rest unnaturally deep, but Martha lay awake, counting the sounds. Scrape, scrape, scrape. A pattern emerging. Not random, not rodents. It sounded like fingernails on wood, like someone trapped and desperate, clawing for freedom. And somewhere in the walls of the World's Fair Hotel, Someone was listening to Martha realize the truth. They weren't guests here. They were specimens, and the building itself was the cage. Martha waited until midday, when Vane would be occupied in his pharmacy below. She needed Clara awake and alert, not drowsy from whatever medicinal tonics her husband kept prescribing for headaches that seemed to conveniently arrive each evening. "Clara, you need to see something." Martha kept her voice steady, though her hands trembled as she positioned her sister near the wall. "Look at this molding. Really look." She pressed the hidden panel, and the small door swung open, revealing the viewing port. Clara leaned forward, squinting into the darkness. "It's a ventilation shaft, for air circulation. It's 3 inches wide, Clara. No air moves through something that small." Martha moved to the second port she'd discovered. And why would there be 4 of them, all positioned to provide different angles of this room? "You're being paranoid." But Clara's voice wavered. She pressed her eye to the opening, and Martha watched her sister's face drain of color. On the other side, in whatever space existed beyond their walls, something was definitely there. The faint glow of lamplight, the suggestion of movement. "Someone has been watching us," Martha whispered. "Watching us undress, watching us sleep. Clara, these are spy holes." Before Clara could respond, footsteps approached in the hallway. Heavy, measured, familiar. The key turned in their lock, and Dr. Vane entered carrying a tea tray, his smile pleasant as always. "Good afternoon, my dears. I thought you might enjoy some refreshment." His eyes moved from Martha's face to the open viewing port, and something flickered in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition that a variable had changed in his experiment. "What are these holes?" Martha demanded, abandoning pretense. Vane set down the tray with careful precision. "Ah, you've discovered my security measures. Quite ingenious, really. This is a hotel, Miss Martha. I must protect my property and ensure my guests' safety. These observation points allow me to monitor for fires, illness, any emergency that might require intervention. You watch us dress. You watch us sleep. I observe my investment." His tone remained cordial, but his eyes had gone flat. "Clara is my wife. This building is my creation. Every brick, every nail, placed according to my specifications. Did you truly believe I would relinquish control simply because you've taken up residence?" Clara made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Vane turned to her, his expression softening into something approximating affection. "My dear Clara, surely you understand. A physician must observe his patients to provide proper care. Your spinal condition requires monitoring. I've been documenting your sleep patterns, your movements, ensuring the environment supports your health." He moved closer, taking Clara's hand. "Everything I do is for your benefit." Martha watched her sister's face, saw the war between revulsion and desperate hope. Clara wanted to believe him, needed to believe that her husband's attention was medical rather than predatory, that his watchfulness was protection rather than violation. "The scratching," Martha pressed. "The sounds in the walls at night. What are those?" Vane's smile never wavered. "Rats, my dear. I've told you this. The building's ventilation system creates acoustics that amplify small sounds. Your anxiety is causing you to imagine threats where none exist." He poured tea, the domesticity of the gesture obscene given the conversation. "Perhaps you require something for your nerves. I have an excellent preparation." "I don't want your medicine." "Then perhaps you'd prefer alternative accommodations?" The threat was delicate, but unmistakable. "I would hate for Clara's marriage to be strained by familial discord. She's been so happy here." Clara's fingers tightened on his. "Martha, please, you're making this difficult. Dr. Vane has been nothing but generous." The betrayal cut deeper than Martha expected. Her sister, choosing this man over her own twin, over 2 decades of shared life and protection. But looking at Clara's pleading eyes, Martha understood. Her sister had spent 23 years being pitied, dismissed, treated as damaged goods. Vane made her feel whole. That intoxication was stronger than any tonic. "I apologize," Martha forced out. "You're right. I've been overwrought." Vane's smile widened. "Perfectly understandable. This is a strange new environment. You simply need time to adjust." He pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "Drink this. It will help you rest." Martha accepted the cup, brought it to her lips, pretended to sip. The liquid smelled sweet, cloying, laced with something that made her tongue tingle from proximity alone. She watched Vane watch her, saw satisfaction in his face. He believed he'd won, believed Martha would be like Clara, pliant and obedient, another specimen in his collection. But Martha had learned something crucial in this encounter. Dr. Silas Vane was not infallible. He was arrogant, and arrogance created blind spots. That night, while Clara slept her drugged sleep, and something scratched desperately in the walls, Martha lay awake planning. If she couldn't convince her sister to leave, she would find evidence so damning that even love-blind Clara couldn't ignore it. Somewhere in this architectural nightmare, Vane was hiding something worse than viewing ports. Martha could feel it the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. She just had to find it before whatever lived in the walls stopped scratching. Martha chose her moment carefully. Vane had left for a business meeting downtown, mentioning he'd be gone most of the afternoon. Clara was absorbed in a medical journal, content in their suite. This was Martha's chance to explore the hotel's lower levels, the areas Vane had casually discouraged them from visiting. The basement stairs descended from a service door near the kitchen, narrow and steep. Martha carried a candle, though gas fixtures lined the walls at irregular intervals. The air grew colder with each step, heavy with that same chemical sweetness she'd noticed before. Underneath it lurked something else, something organic and wrong that made her throat tighten. The basement was a labyrinth. Corridors branched in multiple directions, some ending in storage rooms filled with furniture and trunks, others leading to what appeared to be mechanical spaces for the building's heating and gas systems. Martha moved carefully, mapping her route mentally, trailing her fingers along the brick walls. She almost missed the woman entirely. A figure emerged from a side passage, dressed in a traveling suit that had seen better days. She was perhaps 30, with dark hair escaping from an untidy bun and eyes that held the particular wildness of sustained fear. "Oh, thank God." The woman clutched Martha's arm. "Please tell me you're trying to leave too." Martha's pulse quickened. "I'm just exploring. I live here with my sister." "Then you need to get out." The woman glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting something to materialize from the shadows. "My sister Beatrice checked into this hotel 2 months ago. She was meeting a gentleman friend, someone she'd been corresponding with. Dr. Vane." The name hung between them like a curse. "Beatrice wrote to me after the first week, said she'd fallen in love, that Dr. Vane was a brilliant man who appreciated her mind. Then the letters stopped." The woman's voice cracked. "I came to Chicago 3 days ago. I've been watching the hotel, trying to find a way in without Vane noticing. This morning I followed a delivery man through the service entrance." Martha's mind raced. "Have you found her?" "I found her room. 3rd floor, number 17. It's completely empty now, but there were scratches on the wall near the floor molding. Deep gouges, like someone had been clawing at something. The woman pulled a folded newspaper from her coat pocket. And I found these articles at the library. 4 women connected to this hotel have disappeared in the past year. 4 that made the papers. How many didn't? The newspaper clippings showed faded photographs and desperate headlines. Missing heiress last seen at World's Fair Hotel. Local seamstress vanishes after taking room on 63rd Street. Each story mentioned Dr. Vane peripherally, a helpful hotel proprietor who'd cooperated fully with police, who had no idea what had happened to his unfortunate guests. The police won't investigate, the woman continued. Vane is respected, connected. He makes substantial donations to the department. One detective told me, women come to Chicago with dreams and leave with disappointment. He suggested Beatrice probably ran off with another man. Martha thought of Clara upstairs, trusting and vulnerable. What's your name? Elizabeth. Elizabeth Harrow. Miss Harrow, we need to search together. Systematically. If your sister is still here somewhere. Martha couldn't finish the sentence. The scratching in their walls suddenly took on horrific new meaning. They spent 2 hours exploring, checking storage rooms and mechanical spaces. Elizabeth showed Martha a ledger she'd found in an unlocked office, columns of numbers and cryptic abbreviations that meant nothing to either of them. But there were names, too, initials followed by dates and dollar amounts. BH appeared 6 weeks ago, followed by a figure. $300. That's her, Elizabeth whispered. Beatrice Harrow. Below that entry, delivered to MU, November 5th. What's MU? Martha asked. I don't know, but, Elizabeth's finger traced to another recent entry. CC payment pending. Clara Calloway. The sound reached them then, echoing through the basement corridors. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried. Dr. Vane's voice called out, pleasant and conversational. Miss Martha, are you down here? I returned early and noticed you'd wandered off. Elizabeth's face went white. He can't find me here. He can't know I was searching. Go, Martha urged. Through the kitchen, out the service entrance. Come with me. Bring your sister. She won't leave, not yet, but I'll get her out, I promise. Martha pressed the newspaper clippings into Elizabeth's hands. Take these. If something happens to us, make sure someone knows. Elizabeth hesitated, then nodded and disappeared down a side corridor. Martha forced herself to breathe normally, tucking the ledger entry into her memory as Vane's footsteps grew closer. Ah, there you are. He emerged from the shadows, lamplight catching the angles of his face. You really shouldn't explore the basement alone. The mechanical systems can be dangerous and some areas aren't structurally sound. I was looking for extra linens. In the basement? His smile didn't reach his eyes. How industrious. But you need only ask, my dear. I provide everything my guests require. As he guided her back upstairs, his hand firm on her elbow, Martha noticed something on his jacket cuff, a smudge of something pale and powdery, like chalk or ash. It caught the light as they climbed, and for a moment Martha could swear it looked like bone dust. That night, the scratching stopped completely. The silence was somehow worse, pregnant with implications Martha didn't want to consider. The next morning, when Martha asked about the woman in the travel-stained suit, Vane's expression remained perfectly neutral. I don't recall seeing anyone matching that description. Perhaps another hotel? They all look similar in this district. But Elizabeth Harrow never returned to her boarding house. Her landlady would report her missing 3 days later, adding another name to the list of women who came to Chicago seeking something and found only absence. And in the walls of the World's Fair Hotel, Something that had been scratching fell permanently silent. The disappearance of Elizabeth Harrow changed something fundamental in Martha. She could no longer pretend this was simply paranoia or overprotection. Women were vanishing, and her sister's name was already written in a ledger, like inventory awaiting shipment. She waited 3 days, observing Vane's patterns. He left the hotel every Tuesday at precisely 2 in the afternoon to make pharmaceutical deliveries across the city. This Tuesday, Martha watched him depart from their window, counting to 100 before moving. Clara was drowsy again, another convenient headache requiring another tonic. Martha had been secretly disposing of her own doses, pouring them into the chamber pot, when Vane wasn't looking. She needed her mind sharp. The basement beckoned like an open wound. Martha descended with purpose this time, carrying a better lamp and a penknife she'd stolen from Vane's desk. The chemical smell was stronger today, almost overwhelming, mixed with something that reminded her of the butcher shops back in Philadelphia. She found the furnace room by following the heat. It radiated through a heavy iron door marked mechanical. The room beyond was sweltering, dominated by an industrial furnace that roared with contained fire. This wasn't the standard heating system for the building. This was something larger, hotter, designed for more than keeping guests comfortable. Martha approached the furnace's glass viewing port, holding her lamp close. The flames inside danced white-hot, fed by some accelerant that made them burn with unusual intensity. But it was what she saw melted into the glass itself that stopped her heart. Wedding rings, dozens of them, perhaps more. Their gold bands warped and fused into the viewing port, like insects trapped in amber. Simple bands, ornate, bands with settings where stones had once been, thin rings that might have belonged to young women, wider ones suggesting mature hands. Each represented a promise, a life, a woman who had stood before witnesses and vowed forever. Martha's hands shook as she examined them. Some were recent enough that she could still read engravings. Eternal love. Together always. The words mocked their owners' fates. She forced herself to search the room systematically. In a metal cabinet, she found clothing. Women's garments, neatly folded and labeled with initials and dates. B.H. Elizabeth's sister, Beatrice. The dress was expensive silk, something a woman would wear to meet a gentleman who'd promised her the world. The ledgers sat on a workbench, leather-bound and meticulously maintained. Martha opened the most recent one, her lamp casting shadows across pages filled with Vane's precise handwriting. The entries were clinical, devoid of emotion. Names reduced to initials, followed by dates of acquisition and processing. But it was the financial columns that revealed the full scope of horror. Each entry ended with a payment amount and the initials MU, followed by institution names Martha recognized from medical journals, Northwestern University. Medical school, $300. Rush Medical College, $275. University of Chicago Department of Anatomy, $350. Martha's medical knowledge, limited though it was, provided the missing piece. Medical schools needed cadavers for anatomical study. They needed skeletons for teaching purposes. Clean, articulated specimens that could be used for decades of instruction. Vane wasn't just ending lives, he was selling them. She flipped backward through the ledger, counting entries. 27 women over the past 18 months. 27 who had checked into the World's Fair Hotel and never checked out. The earlier entries included notes about method and efficiency, refinements to his process. He'd been perfecting this. A separate, smaller book contained correspondence with universities, inquiries about specimen quality, negotiations over pricing. One letter praised the exceptional preservation of a recent delivery, noting the skeleton's unusual spinal curvature made it particularly valuable for educational purposes. Martha's blood turned to ice. Clara. Her sister's deformity made her worth more to Vane as a specimen than as a wife. The courtship, the marriage, the gentle medical attention, it had all been acquisition. He'd been collecting a rare piece for his inventory. She photographed what she could with her mind, memorizing names and dates. Then she heard it. The distant sound of the front door opening 2 floors above. Vane's voice calling for her, much too early for his return. Martha moved quickly, replacing the ledgers exactly as she'd found them. But in her haste, she knocked against the furnace door. It swung open slightly, and the heat that poured out carried with it an unmistakable smell, not just chemicals and coal, something that had once been alive. She didn't look inside. Couldn't. Her body's survival instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to move carefully, closing the furnace door, checking that nothing was disturbed. Vane's footsteps echoed on the basement stairs. "Miss Martha, I know you're down here. I saw your lamp from the street." There was no other exit. Martha pressed herself into the shadows behind the furnace, the heat scorching through her dress. She watched through a gap as Vane entered the room, lamp raised, his face serene as always. He moved to the ledger, checking its position. Ran his finger along the furnace's surface, testing for disturbance. Then he smiled, speaking to the empty room with absolute certainty. "You've seen too much now, but that's acceptable. The schedule simply moves forward." He pulled out his pocket watch, consulting it with the air of a man checking a train timetable. "Clara will be ready for processing in approximately 6 hours. The tonic I gave her this afternoon was stronger than usual. And you, dear Martha, have saved me the trouble of hunting you down." He turned directly toward her hiding place, not searching, knowing. "The building tells me everything, every footstep, every opened door. You've been quite the industrious investigator." He began walking toward her shadow, but investigation requires living long enough to report findings. And in my experience, that's where most amateur detectives fail. Martha's hand found the penknife in her pocket. The blade was 3 inches long, designed for sharpening pencils. Against what was coming, it might as well have been a toothpick. Martha didn't wait for Vane to reach her. She burst from behind the furnace, using surprise as her only weapon. The lamp in her hand became a projectile, arcing through the air toward his face. Vane dodged with practiced ease, but the moment of distraction was enough. She ran. The basement corridors were a maze even in daylight, but in the dim gaslighting they became a nightmare of identical passages and false turns. Behind her, Vane's footsteps maintained a steady pace. No running, no urgency. He knew something she didn't. Martha found a stairwell and climbed, emerging on the first floor near the lobby. Empty, as always. The hotel that claimed 60 rooms never seemed to house more than a handful of guests, and those vanished like morning fog whenever she tried to approach them. She had to reach Clara, had to wake her sister from whatever drugged stupor Vane had induced. They could leave through the front door, flag down a carriage, get to the police station before Vane could stop them. But when Martha reached the lobby entrance, the door wouldn't open. She pulled harder, then noticed the mechanism. A magnetic lock, released by a switch somewhere else in the building. The windows were sealed, their frames painted shut years ago. She was trapped in a building designed specifically to prevent escape. Vane's voice echoed from a speaking tube embedded in the wall, his tone conversational. "The hotel has many modern conveniences, Miss Martha. Central locking, controlled ventilation, adjustable gas flow. I can operate every system from my office. It's really quite ingenious." Martha ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time toward the 3rd floor and the bridal suite. Her lungs burned, her corset restricting breath, but terror provided strength that genteel living had never required. The hallway to their room seemed longer than before, stretching like something from a fever dream. She reached their door and found it locked, the key Vane always kept now serving its true purpose. Martha threw her shoulder against the wood, accomplishing nothing but bruised flesh. "Clara!" She pounded on the door. "Clara, wake up!" No response, just silence, thick as grave earth. The gas fixtures along the hallway flickered, then brightened. Martha smelled it immediately. Not the coal gas that normally fed the lights, but something else. Something sweet and heavy that made her head swim after just seconds of exposure. Vane's voice returned, now speaking through multiple tubes simultaneously, creating an omnipresent echo. "I call this the cleaning cycle. The gas mixture is quite sophisticated. It induces unconsciousness in approximately 3 minutes, followed by respiratory failure within 10. Completely painless, I assure you. I'm not a monster." Martha pulled her collar over her nose and mouth, though she knew it was futile. The gas was already seeping through the fabric, invading her lungs with each desperate breath. She stumbled down the hallway, trying other doors. All locked. Every exit. Every room. Every possible refuge sealed tight. Her vision began to blur. The hallway tilted, walls pressing inward. She fell against a door, and it swung open unexpectedly, revealing a room she'd never seen before. Not a guest room. Some kind of observation chamber, with those same viewing ports positioned to peer into multiple rooms throughout the floor. And through one port, she could see Clara. Her sister lay motionless on the bed, her chest barely rising. The gas was filling their suite too, heavier than air, pooling around Clara's sleeping form like invisible water. Martha's fingers found the doorframe, tried to pull herself upright. Had to reach Clara. Had to save her sister, even if she couldn't save herself. The floor lurched sideways. No, not the floor. Her equilibrium failing as the gas worked through her system. She crawled toward the viewing port, pressed her eye against it, watching Clara's face for any sign of consciousness. A sound reached her through the thickening haze. Mechanical, deliberate. The wall beside Clara's bed was moving, the surface splitting along an invisible seam. Behind the decorative paneling, Martha glimpsed something that made her remaining consciousness recoil in horror. A chute. Smooth metal, angled steeply downward, greased to eliminate friction. The hinged wall section swung fully open, and Clara's bed began to tilt, guided by some hidden mechanism. Her sister's unconscious body started sliding toward the opening, toward whatever awaited 2 floors below. Martha tried to scream, but only managed a whisper against the viewing port glass. Her legs wouldn't support her anymore. She collapsed, watching helplessly as Clara disappeared into the darkness of the chute, the wall closing seamlessly behind her as if it had never opened at all. Vane's voice came one last time, soft and satisfied. "The processing room is prepared. The acid baths are at optimal temperature. By morning, you'll both be contributing to medical science. Your sister's unusual skeleton will be particularly valuable. You should be proud." The gas wrapped around Martha like a lover's embrace, pulling her down into darkness. Her last conscious thought was of Clara sliding through the guts of this nightmare building, descending toward whatever horror Vane had designed for his final act of collection. Then the world went black, and Martha fell into nothing, the hotel's mechanical heart beating steadily around her like an iron tomb with a pulse. The courtroom was filled with an almost unbearable tension as the foreman spoke the words that would change everything. "We, the jury, find the defendant, David Delgado, not guilty of the charges brought against him." David blinked, his mind struggling to make sense of the moment. The words rang in his ears like an echo, slowly sinking in. Not guilty. He wasn't guilty. But as the weight of the verdict pressed down on him, a strange emptiness settled into his chest. His family was still gone. Nothing could bring them back. His defense team erupted in quiet celebration. Their hard work had paid off, and David, though physically free, couldn't shake the sense of unease that gnawed at him. The world outside the courtroom seemed to blur into a haze. He had been given a second chance, but at what cost? Was the truth about his family's deaths still hidden, buried beneath layers of doubt? As David left the courtroom, the crowd outside was a mix of reporters, curious onlookers, and those who had followed the trial from the beginning. Flashbulbs went off, the air thick with questions. David barely registered the chaos around him. His thoughts were consumed by what had happened, and what still didn't make sense. In the days that followed, David tried to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. He returned to his old life, but nothing felt right. His family's absence was a weight that threatened to crush him at every turn. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't chosen this nightmare. But now, with the trial behind him, he was left to pick up the pieces of a broken life. The pressure from the public was relentless. The media painted him as a tragic figure, a victim of his father's expectations, a young man torn apart by grief and mental illness. But there was a dark undercurrent to the coverage. Questions still lingered. Was he really the innocent son who had lost everything? Or was there something more to the story? The media's fascination with David was not just about his acquittal, but about the mystery that still surrounded the deaths of his family. David's days became a blur of interviews and media appearances, each one more draining than the last. He was pushed into the spotlight, forced to explain the unexplainable. But as he spoke, his mind kept returning to the moments before the tragedy. The masked man, the strange feeling of detachment. It was as if he was standing outside himself, watching it all happen, but unable to control it. The nightmares didn't help. Each night, David would wake in a cold sweat, his heart racing. He could still see his family's lifeless faces, the blood staining the carpet, the silence that followed. But what haunted him most was the feeling that he wasn't alone in his own mind, that someone else had been there, with him in that house. His therapist had suggested that the trauma might be triggering his associative identity disorder, a condition David hadn't fully understood at the time. The idea that he could have been someone else, someone capable of such horror, was terrifying. But what if that was the truth? What if David wasn't the only one who had been living in his own body all along? One evening, as David sat alone in his apartment, he received an unexpected visitor. Richard, his best friend. Richard had been one of the few people who stuck by him through the trial, though David had pushed him away in the aftermath. Now, standing at his doorstep, Richard's face was a mixture of concern and confusion. "I've been trying to reach you," Richard said, stepping into the apartment without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk." David felt a wave of unease. "What's wrong?" Richard hesitated, then sat down on the couch across from David. "I've been thinking about the trial, about what happened before, and there's something I need to tell you." David's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't seen Richard this serious in years. "What do you mean?" Richard looked down, his hands trembling slightly. I think I might know what happened that night. I've been holding something back, something I didn't want to believe at first. David felt a chill run through him. What are you talking about? Richard took a deep breath, his voice barely above a whisper. I think you were right, David. There was someone else in the house that night. David's pulse quickened. What are you saying? I don't know how to explain it, but I saw something the night your family was killed. Not just the masked man, but something else. Someone else. Someone who wasn't you. David stared at Richard, his mind racing. What do you mean? Richard looked up, his eyes filled with fear. I don't know how to explain it, but I think there's more to this than we know. And I think you're hiding something. Something about that night. Something you don't remember. David's thoughts swirled. Could Richard be right? Was there another layer to this mystery, one that even he couldn't access? Martha woke to stone cold. Her head throbbed, chemicals coated her tongue. For terrifying seconds, she couldn't remember why her lungs burned. Then memory struck. Clara. The gas. The chute. Complete darkness surrounded her. She pushed upright, fighting nausea. The gas should have killed her, but Vane had miscalculated. Perhaps her smaller tonic doses left less sedative in her system. Perhaps she'd held her breath longer. Whatever the reason, she was alive. She crawled until her fingers found a wall, then followed it. The darkness pressed against her eyes, silence broken only by breathing and distant humming. Then she heard it. Someone else breathing down here. Clara! Her whisper echoed strangely. The breathing quickened, became a whimper. Martha moved toward it, her hands finding metal bars. A cage. Please help me. The voice was female, weak. He said it was time for processing. Martha found the latch and opened it. Can you walk? I think so. Days, maybe. Drugged. The woman clutched Martha's arm. There's a room with light through there. That's where he takes them. They moved together until Martha found a door. Light leaked around its edges. She pressed her ear against it. Just machinery and dripping. She pushed it open. Gas lamps revealed a laboratory. Surgical tables, glass vessels, anatomy equipment. And suspended from the ceiling were tanks, large glass tanks filled with clear liquid, illuminated from below. The woman made a sound between scream and sob. He said he was preparing them for universities. Skeletons, in various stages of preparation in acid baths. Martha forced herself to move through the room. At the far end, she found Clara on a surgical table, still unconscious, still breathing. Beside the table sat a cart with syringes and vials. Next to that, an empty tank. Martha rushed to her sister, checking pulse and breathing. Cold, but alive. Vane hadn't begun yet. There was still time. Help me lift her, Martha commanded. Before he returns. Footsteps on the stairs, locks engaging. Vane's voice through the tubes. Remarkable, Miss Martha. I calculated the gas exposure to the minute, yet here you are. A pause. And you freed one of my earlier acquisitions. No matter. The building has contingencies. The gas lamps flickered. Vane controlled even the light, could plunge them into darkness. You have two options. Surrender to processing, or navigate the basement in darkness while I hunt you through corridors I designed for this purpose. Either way, you'll contribute to science. The lamps dimmed. Martha looked around desperately. Her eyes landed on the cart. Vane wasn't the only one who could manipulate. Chemistry. If they were going to die here, Martha would ensure Vane's murder factory died with them. Martha grabbed vials from the cart, reading labels by flickering lamplight. Chloroform, ether, carbolic acid. The chemicals Vane used to prepare his specimens could serve another purpose. "What are you doing?" the freed woman whispered. "We need to run." "Run where? He controls every door." Martha continued gathering supplies. "But he doesn't control fire." She mixed compounds with desperate precision, pouring volatile liquids into a beaker. Behind her, Clara stirred on the table, moaning softly. "Clara!" Martha rushed over, shaking her shoulders. "Wake up!" Clara's eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Martha? Where?" Her gaze fell on the laboratory, the tanks, the truth suspended in acid. Horror dawned. "Oh, God." "Can you stand?" Clara tried, but her legs buckled. The drugs still gripped her. Martha caught her, feeling her sister's dead weight. The lamps dimmed further. Vane's voice returned, amused. "Still resisting? I'm beginning to think unconsciousness suits you better." A hissing sound filled the laboratory, gas returning through vents, invisible poison seeping in. "The ventilation system," Clara whispered, her medical training cutting through the haze. "Martha, look at the ductwork." Martha followed her gaze to metal ducts along the ceiling, disappearing into walls. Clara's eyes had caught something. "The building's architecture is wrong," Clara continued, words slurring but urgent. "Those ducts angle upward, but there's no external vent. The gas has to exhaust somewhere. If we follow the main line backwards..." Understanding struck Martha. The building wasn't just for trapping victims. It was a machine, and machines had weaknesses. She hoisted the beaker. "Can you identify the main gas line?" Clara squinted at the ceiling, her anatomical knowledge translating. "There, that thick pipe toward the furnace room. Everything branches from it." Martha helped Clara stand, the other woman supporting her opposite side. They moved as quickly as possible, following the pipe along the wall. The gas grew thicker. Martha held her breath, knowing she'd only last minutes. The pipe descended into a junction box near the furnace room. Martha grabbed a wrench from a workbench and began loosening the seal. "You're going to blow the building," the freed woman said. "Just the gas system, maybe." Martha's fingers fumbled. "When I open this junction, gas will flood here. The chemicals I mixed are flammable. The furnace heat..." They all understood. Trigger an explosion large enough to breach the systems, create chaos for escape, or die trying. Clara's hand found Martha's wrist. "My spine. All my life, I studied every vertebra, every curve, understanding why I was different." Her grip tightened. "The building is the same. Built wrong, structurally compromised by all those dead ends and sealed rooms. Vane made it unstable trying to make it perfect for killing. There's a coal chute," the other woman remembered suddenly. "From street level to the furnace room. Delivery men used it. If we can reach it..." Martha's wrench slipped. The junction seal cracked. Gas whistled out under pressure, filling the air with explosive potential. She grabbed the beaker and threw it against the furnace door. Glass shattered. Chemicals splashed. Then the air ignited. The explosion was concussive, bone-rattling. It threw all three women backward. The furnace door blew open, flames erupting. The gas line ruptured completely, feeding the fire. Through smoke and heat, Martha saw it. The coal chute, its metal door blown open. Beyond it, gray daylight and open air. She hauled Clara upright. The other woman was already moving. Together, they stumbled through flames and debris toward that rectangle of salvation, the building screaming as Vane's perfect killing machine began consuming itself. They clawed up the coal chute, hands scraping metal, lungs burning. The street appeared above them, people stopping to stare at the smoke pouring from the building. Martha pushed Clara through first, then helped the other woman, finally dragging herself onto the sidewalk. Chicago afternoon surrounded them. Normal. Real. The World's Fair Hotel burned behind them, flames visible through windows, smoke billowing into the autumn sky. "Fire!" someone shouted. "Get the fire brigade!" Martha held Clara as her sister coughed and trembled. They were alive. Impossibly, miraculously alive. Behind them, in his office, Dr. Silas Vane watched his experiment burn and calculated his next move with the same cold precision he applied to everything. Some monsters, Martha would learn, couldn't be killed by fire alone. The Chicago Police Department didn't believe them at first. Martha sat in a precinct office, wrapped in a borrowed coat, watching skepticism cross the detective's face as she described the laboratory, the tanks, the ledgers documenting 27 murders. Beside her, Clara trembled, and Sarah Miller, the woman they'd freed, couldn't stop crying. "Dr. Vane is a respected businessman," Detective Morrison said. "These are serious accusations. Then search his hotel, the basement. The evidence is there. The building is engulfed in flames. Any evidence will be destroyed." But the fire brigade contained the blaze to the basement and first floor. When flames were extinguished, they found something that made hardened firefighters turn away. The tanks had survived. Glass doesn't burn easily. By evening, police had cordoned off the World's Fair Hotel. By midnight, they'd found ledgers in Vane's fireproof safe, pages listing names, dates, and payments to medical institutions. By dawn, they'd matched those initials to missing persons reports filed across Chicago and beyond. Dr. Silas Vane was arrested, attempting to board a train to Philadelphia, carrying $15,000 in cash. The trial consumed Chicago for months. Newspapers called him the American Bluebeard, the beast of 63rd Street. They published sketches of his calm face, the way he sat motionless through testimony describing unimaginable horrors. Martha and Clara testified on a cold January morning in 1894. The courtroom was packed. "He watched us through holes in the walls," Martha told the jury. "He controlled every door, every light, every breath of air. It wasn't a hotel. It was a trap designed by someone who understood exactly how to turn architecture into a weapon." Clara's testimony was quieter, but devastating. "He made me feel seen for the first time in my life. That was his genius. He found what each woman needed most and became that. For me, acceptance. For others, love or opportunity. He studied us like specimens before we ever became specimens." The prosecutor presented evidence methodically. Melted wedding rings, correspondence with universities, financial records showing Vane made over $40,000 selling skeletal remains. Testimony from professors who'd purchased specimens without questioning their availability. Sarah Miller's testimony sealed Vane's fate. She'd been lured by a job advertisement describing 6 days in a cage, waiting for processing that never came only because Martha found her first. "He told me it wouldn't hurt," Sarah said, voice breaking. "That I'd simply fall asleep and wake up contributing to medical advancement, as if being turned into a teaching tool was an honor." The jury deliberated 3 hours. They found Dr. Silas Vane guilty on 7 counts of murder, though everyone knew the real number was far higher. The judge sentenced him to hang. Vane showed no emotion, but as bailiffs led him away, he looked directly at the sisters. His expression held neither remorse nor hatred, just curiosity. "You should be dead," he said simply. Martha didn't respond. There was nothing to say to a man who'd reduced human lives to inventory. The World's Fair Hotel was demolished that spring. The city wanted no monument to Vane's crimes. They tore it down brick by brick, filling the basement with concrete. They found more evidence in demolition: hidden compartments in walls, speaking tubes extending throughout the building, ventilation shafts where women had been sealed alive. The building gave up its secrets slowly, each revelation more horrifying than the last. Final count: 27 confirmed victims, perhaps as many as 200 total. Women who'd vanished into Chicago's crowds, their disappearances lost in a city too busy building its future to notice its darkness. Clara and Martha returned to Philadelphia, but the city felt too small after Chicago's terrible education. They bought a modest house together, never married, and spent their lives working with organizations helping vulnerable women. Clara trained nurses. Martha wrote articles about dangers facing women traveling alone. They never spoke publicly about Vane again after the trial. But sometimes in winter nights, Martha would wake to scratching in the walls. Just mice, she'd tell herself. Just memory, refusing to stay buried. Dr. Silas Vane was hanged on May 7th, 1894. His last words were reportedly about the architectural innovations he'd pioneered, the efficiency of his systems. He never once mentioned the women who paid with their lives for nothing more than seeking opportunity in a city that promised dreams, but delivered nightmares. Women whose names we'll never all know, whose stories died with them. But Clara and Martha survived. They remembered, and in remembering, they ensured that at least some of those women would never be forgotten. If this story disturbed you, that's appropriate. It should. Real evil rarely announces itself with monsters and fangs. It comes dressed in respectability, wearing a smile, offering exactly what you need most. The scariest monsters in history have always been human. If you found this story gripping, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest corners. We don't shy away from the truth here, no matter how uncomfortable, because the only thing more dangerous than remembering history's horrors is forgetting them. Drop a comment below about which historical case we should cover next. And remember, the darkness is only powerful when we refuse to shine light on it.